And the other thing I tell people is, I'm afraid. You're afraid because you haven't prepared. Think about what I said about that. The more you prepare, the more that you have all the answers, the more of a chance of success and less as a risk.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Karla Code. Today, I'm going to be sitting down with a friend of mine who is a first-generation American who grew up in El Paso, Texas, and who comes from very humble beginnings, just like myself. He started GTIF Capital and is involved with the NACL Chosen by Doctors, Fazeclan, Downtown Space Plans, and I'm sure I'm missing a few more. He's fluent in 5 languages, which is crazy to me. And that is what became what he calls his niche. That niche played a huge role in him getting his foot into Deloitte. 8 years later, he was one of the youngest partners ever at the age of 34. This man is and did all of this without ever completing his university degree. This gets me very excited because, as you guys know, I'm a huge believer in the power of self-education. So without further ado, my friend, David Chen.
Thanks,
Hey,
Karla.
David.
Hey, I'm super honored to be on the show. Love everything that you do, and I'm just really honored to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day. From the looks of it, you're extremely busy all the time, but I'll get into that in just a little bit. So I read up on you before I decided to, interview you for this podcast. And I had this misconceived notion from before that I thought maybe you had already come from a wealthy family. That was wrong, of course. That's anything but the case. You guys actually came from China. Your grandpa used to be wealthy, but then he lost everything during the Communist Revolution. Then you guys left to Taiwan and you were very poor while you were in Taiwan. How did
Right.
you guys end up from Taiwan into the United States?
A lot of it's fate. I think my grandpa had his beliefs, and he was, they actually founded Harbin University, which was my great grandfather and my grandfather, and he was principal at 23. The revolution started. He had different beliefs, so he went to Taiwan. We actually ended up leaving. Half of my great grandmother and my oldest aunt were left in China. So for 30 years, they didn't even know if they were alive or not because there's no communications. He gets to Taiwan. He continues the education system, educates a lot of students, talks to them, goes from there. And then it was during the time of the 70s and 80s where Taiwan wasn't necessarily very secure. There were still questions about if Taiwan was going to go back to China. Nixon had visited Chairman Mao. And my oldest aunt, my second aunt, was sent to the U.S. to pursue her doctors, and my dad went to Germany. I spent 4 years there. I was almost Austrian because they went to Austria, and my parents were married in Austria, and they speak German. So they speak one more language than I do.
Wow.
And really, we're just kind of immigrants trying to look for a better life. And in the 70s and 80s, the early 80s, Germany wasn't very great at the time either. So they went to Austria, where they ultimately ended up in Vienna. And then he went back to Taiwan after 4 years, and then went to the U.S. because my aunt was there and really trying to do the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It is the greatest country in the world. Gives us the greatest opportunity. It's definitely the most diverse country, despite what anyone else believes. And he went over there and was working with my aunt. And like most immigrants, we were in the restaurant business because education wasn't there. There was a language barrier. You can't transfer your education over there. It was really interesting because as much as my grandpa was an educator, both my aunts are doctors, have PhDs, and my uncle and my dad were in the restaurant business. So 2 different skewed scales of education and what came out of it. And, he was in the restaurant business, and we came from Taiwan over here. I was born in Taiwan. We came over here. And what was really interesting about this was how we got to El Paso was it was fate. And what I mean by fate, we were living in an apartment complex out in Aspen. We were very, very humble. I mean, I think I've mentioned a couple times, we were homeless at one point, digging through garbage, for food, for toys. And, even though you don't know what that word means, it resonates in you because you are different from your friends. And there's 2 main things that I want to discuss and happen. One is I remember driving around the apartment complexes, picking up the furniture that people threw away from the low-end apartment complexes and putting it in our house. So I didn't know what a box spring was or what a frame was underneath a mattress until I was like 15. I thought it was normal to throw the mattress on the floor. And that was one thing I clearly remember. The second thing is during school lunch, you always want to trade out food and get the best food. And we were so poor that a good day was half a hot dog and a regular day was an egg sandwich. And being 6, 7, 8 years old, eating an egg sandwich that's been sitting there all day in a lunchbox smells. So nobody wanted to trade with you. And I remember one kid opened it up, made fun of me. I ran out, maybe 6 or 7, ran out of the room crying and couldn't use the word poor, but could definitely use the word, my parents can't give me anything. And those moments shaped our lives. And going into Fate, the guy, a man named David Hahn, had told my parents, hey, listen, I'm going to rent out a restaurant for you. It's called Hibachi. It's right in downtown Aspen. You have to pay this much a month to rent it, whatever else is yours. And my parents, based on Fate, took it. They ran with it, went from there, renting the restaurant out. And then one day, one of the Zaragosas, Pedro Zaragoza, was in Aspen, had the restaurant. This was before Google, and wanted to know the teriyaki chicken recipe. My dad thought he was crazy, wanted to pay for it. Ends up telling my father, you know what, we have a restaurant in Ciudad Juarez. We want you guys to come on down and run it with us. And it was Miami or El Paso. That was the other option. And my parents chose El Paso. And literally, it was so crazy because being poor and humble, the next thing I know, we're taking Pedro's private jet at 10.
What?
Flying over to El Paso, getting here, going across the border to Ciudad Juarez. It was the old Bamboo Palace, right by the El Chaparral. That was us. And that's kind of how we got it. It was fate. It was the ability to get out of your comfort zone and try to want more from your family. And that's what my parents did. And so we were in the restaurant business. We're still in the restaurant business for all these years. And that's kind of how we did it. But my parents came from no education. My dad was a dishwasher. My mom was a coat hanger, bartender, to working up in management and really believing in what they had to do, although there was no end destination. Got very lucky with fate because they excelled, and the guy who owned it thought that they could run it. And then through the course of just fate, came here to El Paso, and then that's how we got here.
Oh my God, I literally got chills you telling me about you guys getting on the private jet when you're 10 after being so poor and going through everything that you guys went through.
Yeah.
See, I feel like in some ways I can relate with that, but my family never went through the entrepreneurial like direction, you know. I wish they would have, but for my family it was a thing where, you know, I was born in Juarez, and then we went over to the US when I was maybe like 4, but they kind of got stuck. It was a thing where, okay, we crossed like the border, and then now we're going to work our asses off for the rest of our lives, and then that's it. They never thought that there could be anything more than that, and that makes me very sad because I know the potential of human beings in general, you know. And it makes me so happy that your family actually, you know, they got the opportunity, because we get a lot of opportunities in life, right? But it's just ours to take them if we choose
Right.
to or not. And your family actually took them. And I mean, it sounds really scary, honestly, you know. They were already kind of going all over the world trying to find a better life, and then all of a sudden this random guy tells them, hey, I want you guys to run my restaurant in this random city, you guys want to come? And they said yes.
Right.
And that sounds amazing to me.
Right. No, it definitely was. I mean, you know, you talk about life and you talk about restrictions, you talk about everything else. And I think a lot of times, especially growing up in that age group, coming from a different country, you know, education is key, and it was a guarantee, right? In other words, you might not be able to max out your full potential, but it was a guaranteed safeness.
Yep.
And that's where I think, you know, as immigrants that come to this great country and really, you know, help it grow and bring in more money and really try to develop it, because it is our country at this point. My parents were just, they took the chance, and they didn't have a savings, and they didn't know Spanish. And my favorite joke of my dad is when he first got the Bamboo Palace, and he was a partner with Pedro at the time. And I started to say, my dad, when he tried to say chicken, he would go, quack, 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 quack. Or if he tried to say cow, because he couldn't speak Spanish, he would go moo, and then the guys would understand it. But that, even the most basic form of communication, wasn't even in our existence.
Wow.
And so the fact that they had the galls to do that, I think is really motivational for me, and what has happened.
Do you remember at all back when you didn't know English? Because I remember I was in, I think it was pre-K, and the teacher didn't want to let me be in pre-K because it was a, an all English class, and she said I should be in bilingual. My mom said, no, I want her to learn English, right? But I remember distinctly like the shift when finally I understood what people were telling me. Do you remember kind of that shift?
I remember a little bit of the shift. My mom tells me a story constantly when I was like maybe 3 or 4 years old, because I came here when I was 2, right? And so the fact that I speak Mandarin fluently with no accent, to a lot of people who are Chinese, they're mind blown. And I credit that to speaking at home with my family.
Of course,
But
yeah.
I remember going to my mom telling me, and I remember this, going to Taco Bell, and I was so hungry, and I told my mom I wanted food. And she's like, I don't know how to say it. And I remember just saying, just point at it. And so we would order Taco Bell, and I was like, and that's kind of how it went. And the light clicked when we were in school, because we were so young, that at 5 or 6 is when I started speaking English. And then even Spanish, like, I learned Spanish at 10, 11, 12 when I was playing basketball, because behind the restaurant, it was neighborhoods, and I was playing with guys that spoke Spanish, and we were just playing basketball. And from there, I started speaking more Spanish and then working at the restaurant. And so it helped me develop my Spanish, right? It was, again, just the ability to want to learn, which is very important. The ability to be put in a position where you don't have a choice. And if you don't have a choice in things, you get it done. That's just the reality of it. And so that's kind of what happened, and went from there.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people, that I've known also growing up, they kind of just decided that they didn't want to learn English, and they just kind of got stuck because they were so adamant in their mind that they couldn't learn, and that they would say, quote unquote, I'm too dumb to learn English. Like I can't learn it. I can't learn it. So they just stopped. And then 20, 30 years later, they're still speaking just, the basic words to get by. And I always thought that was so unfortunate, but yeah, you're totally right. You have to actually want to learn.
Right.
It's embarrassing, right? Trying to learn a new language
Right.
if you see it that way.
Right. No, it is. I mean, look, it's deep down ingrained. Maybe when you first started learning, someone made fun of you, and then it somehow triggered something back deep down inside where you have that fear. A lot of times we're so reactionary to those things that we do, and we don't realize why we're even reactionary. Like, we just think we're right. And then if you really go in depth and you really think about it, it's because something had happened that triggered you from this, and you don't have the realization that it's actually a wrong thing to do. Right. And it's the same thing with language. I think that, like, when you try to learn a language, there's a pride thing, and people are making fun of you, and I'm so smart in this language, not in that language. But what people don't seem to understand is it's an embetterment, because the world is global. The world is integration. And if it wasn't for the fact that I spoke those languages, I would have never gotten a job at Deloitte. And it was never holding the restrictions, because we're taught to be restricted. We're taught that this is the best that we can do. As immigrants, we're even taught that even more. We already have our disadvantages. And the only advantage is we know how lucky we are to be here, which I think a lot of people don't realize how lucky they are to be here. And we accelerate, because if you're behind a race to win the race, and that guy's ahead of you, what are you doing? You're sprinting.
Yeah.
You have to catch up. So we're sprinting to catch up while they were jogging. And that's what allowed us to do what we've done. And I think that mentality, fortunately for me, is still ingrained in me today, because I'm still trying to sprint to get to where I want to go. And that's something that I think most people seem to not understand.
Yeah, definitely. As far as you learning Mandarin at home and then all of that helping you in the future with Deloitte, I'll get into that a little bit in just a bit. I was also reading up on you and listening to some of your podcasts. At some point you were in college and you weren't doing very well. You just weren't you weren't a student that was excelling. And I feel like I can relate with that as well. And then both of your parents had heart attacks in the same year. Is that true? And then they weren't able to pay for your college anymore. So it was either you or your sister that had to drop out. And since she was doing well, she went ahead and stayed and you left.
Right. The funny thing about college, and any of the young listeners here, is people have a misconception that when you leave high school, that you're going to go to college, and college is going to be the set for your job and your dream the rest of your life. And that's the furthest from the truth. Even when you leave high school, I tell people all the time, nobody has it figured out. I'll be approaching my 40s this year. I don't have it figured out. It seems like I have it figured out, but I don't. And that's not to say that you can't have it figured out, but it's reassurance that everybody's on this path of trying to do the best that we can do. And we often look at all these motivational people and all these things that happen and think that the path is clear, but they don't show all the other stuff that happens and all the terrible things that happen that really kind of give you the grit to continue on this path. And I think that's kind of the big thing, right? Is your ability to kind of overcome and try to make it work to do what you have to do.
Yeah, and see, that's one of the main focuses of my podcast in general, is that for so long I was always getting messages, from girls thinking that my life was perfect and that I was perfect and that everything was just perfect. And I didn't like that because everything is far from perfect. I suffer from like a lot of things on my own, for the longest time, I also did think that I needed to have like a full formal education to be able to like do better in life. And then now I'm like learning that you don't need it at all. You just need to, have great ideas and just go through with them. I also, suffer from anxiety and depression, which I have to overcome every single day. So
Right.
that was one of the main things I started talking about on my podcast, talking about all the things that I'm actually not good at and that I'm not perfect, so that people can see
Right.
that it's not like.
Right. And to go back to what you're saying, like, constantly we talk to business people and you will have this whole discussion. Things aren't perfect. We're all trying to figure out a work-life balance. We're trying to figure out our education. We're trying to figure out, our aging parents, marriage, kids, friends, everything that we're trying to do while trying to, accomplish hope and dreams. And, the thing about school with me was I went into school thinking that I wanted to be a genetic engineer because I thought it was such a cool thing. I was terrible in science.
Yeah.
And when I think about what had happened, that wasn't the days where people wouldn't say you had ADD or ADHD. And it was more of because you're just lazy as opposed to you not being focused. And I could never sit there and talk to somebody for 30 minutes to an hour because I'd start losing focus. My mom would call it the birds started coming flying away. And all my educators felt that. And what I realized was it was a massive sense of self-esteem. Because when you didn't get the first one wrong, right? You didn't get the second one right, and third one right, you start putting yourself in this dark hole of like, I'm not smart enough. And then when you get one right, it's like, whoa, I got one right. And we're so focused on that one right and helping us do that. And what I realized was I didn't do good in school because I wasn't mature enough to be on my own at 18. I don't think most 18-year-olds are, much less away from my parents, trying to figure out how to do life skills that my parents did best they could, but I didn't know what they were. And it wasn't like Google was available at that time. And the reality was it was kind of living through. And then it was comfort, right? You go from having accountability from your parents that you have to come home and do this and this and this, or at least if they don't tell you, you at least know that they know that you should be trying to get your schoolwork done. They're kind of babying you going from there. And I went to a private school that had 12 people in my graduating class. To my first class at University of Arizona, I had 550 people. And I almost pissed myself because I was like, holy cow, I've never seen this many people in my life. And really trying to grow and adapt. And then there's that fear of, because you have it together, you can't talk to anybody else about what your problems are. And that's true today as a business person and even as a human being. And my most beneficial relationships are the ones that I'm very honest with. And I do tell them the problems that we exist because we're all on the same path. It just, we're not showing it all. And so spending 6 years there and finding out both my parents had a heart attack, it was tough, But for most Asians, 6 years into college, you should have your PhD.
Yeah.
And then it was a shame because I was ashamed that after 6 years of being in college, I didn't have my degree. People were graduating. My baby sister jumped a year. She's going to college now with me. My parents are paying for it. I didn't know what a resume was. I didn't know how financial aid worked. I was too ashamed to ask or too embarrassed to ask because I had to pretend that everything's together. And had I just asked and maybe for that moment didn't care so much about feeling stupid or sounding stupid, I'd be way more advanced where I am now than anything else, right? And that goes back to, well, when you were back in a kid, someone made fun of you, that's why you don't want to ask. And now I ask. I could really care less what you think about me because I want to know what the answer is. And that's been indicative the rest of my life because what happened was when we went back over there, I literally, at 22 years old, worked at my parents' restaurant to keep the house because it went from having a ton of business to no business and have my sister go to school. And for 3 years, I worked with no salary driving the busted college car that I had up till 25 years old with no degree, while all my friends were taking $60, $70, $80,000 jobs. And here I am with the college debt with no education, hopeless, working at a restaurant, which honestly, if I was going to do that, I should have just never gone to college, right? And just ran the restaurant, and did it for 3 years when fate happened again. And I didn't know anything about Deloitte. I had actually never been to China. I was running the China practice. And I went in there saying I could do it all. And I did.
Wait, so you were working at your parents' restaurant. How did you even find out about Deloitte? How did you even decide to go in and apply? How did that happen?
So what happened was there was a great man, his name is Fazeclan, who passed away, rest his soul. Fausto was a regular customer at the restaurant. And what Deloitte Mexico did differently was during the 70s and the 80s, all the Japanese maquiladoras that came here became a focal point for Deloitte. So Deloitte's real name is Galaz Yamasaki Ruiz in Mexico. And that was founded by Benito Yamazaki and two Mexican men that worked together and formed Deloitte and got the rights to Deloitte there. And he had said, listen, there's an opportunity for you to develop the China practice. This is in 2005. China was not that big at the time. And really make it grow. I think we do what the Japanese did. So I did it. And how he met us was because he went over to our accountant who their company just got bought out by Deloitte. And he says, hey, there's a guy, we want someone that speak Chinese. And they were going for my father. And then a guy named Raul Rosas says, look, Robert has his own businesses. He's not going to do that. But he has a son named David who speaks better English and Spanish than he does. You should talk to him. And he came and talked to me. And not knowing anything in the interviews, but going in there with confidence and, again, taking the opportunity, I took the damn job. And then I looked up what it was afterwards.
Oh, shit.
That's the difference. I didn't know who they were. And when I got the job, that's when I started realizing what haters were. And why do I say that? Because my friends were so appalled and shocked and even angry. I had one friend ask me for a business card because they couldn't believe that I, as a college dropout, worked at Deloitte. And obviously, the typical Deloitte resume is not that, right? But it's all about the opportunity and you trying to find what was going to make you different. And the fact that I could speak these different languages made me different. I had never even been to China at that point in time. But I took the job, went from there, and I learned on the fly to really kind of go from there. But I had to take the guts to do that. And that to me is a big thing. Like, you have to have the guts to do that, Without that, you
just jump in.
Exactly.
Gosh. Okay. So that's amazing. Going back to the language thing, do you remember at all when you were younger, being embarrassed that you knew Mandarin or being embarrassed that you knew anything else but English?
I grew up in a very interesting situation because as we started getting a little bit more, I would spend my weekends in Ciudad Juarez. I would go to the Campestre to see friends. I would walk around Superret. I would walk around all the malls. And then I was growing up here with my friends in El Paso, and then speaking only Mandarin at home. And then in the summers, I would absolutely go to the Philippines and spend some time in Taiwan. And every time I was in Taiwan, I go to the Philippines. My cousins were there. So I like to say I grew up with 5 different cultures that made a big difference in what I did. And the most embarrassing part was I was never Chinese enough. I was never Mexican enough. I was never American enough. I was never Filipino enough. I was in my own abyss. And I think not only was I ashamed to speak Chinese, but I was also ashamed to speak to my parents being Chinese. Like, as if there was something wrong with that in the current thing that it is. And as an Asian American now, this is a constant issue that we all face. Like, right? Like, are we embarrassed because my parents can't speak the language? They don't have the money. They don't have any of that stuff. And we do. And how do you adapt to that and be, secure who you are as a human being? And so, yeah, not only was I embarrassed to speak the language, I was embarrassed to speak Chinese. And I was embarrassed with my parents because they would come in, they would have a thick accent. And I had to explain to the guys here at El Paso why we had thick accent and what it was. And it wasn't until probably my mid-20s that I became very comfortable with who I was. Mid-20s, not even my early 20s, not even when I got Deloitte, but my mid-20s where I was very comfortable in my shell. And that's a maturity thing. That's why I talk about age and where we're at. But it was definitely a journey.
See, that's amazing because before you were probably embarrassed. And then it turns out that that was a huge blessing that had catapulted basically your career in the future. Um, yeah, I feel for me, I barely started getting comfortable with everything once we, no, I would say like in my late 20s, but it also took traveling to be able to start seeing that.
Right.
Yeah, it's the same thing here. Here, I'm not Mexican enough. I go to the US, I'm not like American enough. But it's a really interesting thing. You start going to different countries, you start realizing that knowing all these different languages is a blessing. Like you, for instance, you can pretty much communicate anywhere in the world.
I'm lucky. I mean, if I can't speak it, I can read it. I mean, 80% of the world's languages are the ones I speak. You know, there's been very rarely a time where we've gone to a country where we weren't able to communicate. Even in France, where I 6 years of French, but I don't really remember, I could at least read enough of the signs because I speak Spanish to understand what it was. In Korea, they spoke Chinese and Spanish. That helped. And even in Egypt, the fact that I spoke English helped a lot. So it really is beneficial on a global side, not just in travel, but in business, and relating people's cultures and identifying with them. It really has been a blessing to have these different cultures and languages.
Yeah, it opens the world. You could literally be in any room, and if you hear somebody speaking your one of the languages that you speak, you can start conversation with them immediately, and
And
just
it's a
yeah.
shocker. And they love it. Like, my Spanish isn't perfect, but the fact that I can speak Spanish, I get the respect of the people when I do speak Spanish, right? And they know it's not perfect, and they don't really criticize. It's more of a respect, like, wow, you took the time to learn our language. That means a lot to us. And that's really where the benefit comes in.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Okay, so then you're at Deloitte. You didn't know what the heck you were doing because they didn't train you. You were like, "What's going on?" So then you get fired about 8 months later, correct? And then you were jobless and you were freaking out. You
Yeah.
didn't know what to do, so you went back to them and you gave them an offer to get like what? What was it? A 60% pay cut?
Yeah, it was interesting because remember, I didn't graduate college, busted car to now running the restaurant and working at this prestigious firm like Deloitte and making $0 to 60,000 very, very quickly. So like any 25, 26-year-old man, you buy a new car, you try to get your own place, you try to figure out life. And 8 months into the job, I hadn't had any real formal training, and that was my fault because my whole entire life has been taking the initiative and learning. And I got very comfortable because I was almost in a daze because it was such a big job and it was so prestigious. I felt so empowered by it that I almost lost my bearings. And when I went into the job, I got let go because Faso had retired. There was a new partner in stake, and there were 5 people that were there. And I tell this about corporate, corporate in general. It's not just corporate American, corporate world. They were jealous that I was a young foreign guy there. They all went to college together, and the easiest person to fire was the person who wasn't his friend.
Hmm.
And that was me. And he had every right to, because if you look at a perspective of money, I wasn't bringing any money. I wasn't learning initiative, even though I kept asking, and it was trying to point the finger saying, look, I tried to ask for it. If I really cared, I would have learned it on my own. And I didn't, right? I used the excuse, and I kind of rode the coattails of what my first experience was. And then when I got let go, I was so shocked. And now I'm a double failure because I didn't finish college. Everyone's so impressed that I'm at Deloitte, and now I've been terminated. And over what? Over laziness or not the ability to learn. So I was given a blessing that I didn't take advantage of, and I wasn't hearing all the signs, and I was losing a little bit of myself as a man. And I think what happened was when I realized what was going on, and after like 2 months of crying and feeling sorry for myself and wrapped around in a hole, I realized nobody gave a shit. Nobody at Deloitte gave a shit that I wasn't going to work. Nobody in my family, besides my parents, could help me out. My friends were going to point and laugh. The world was going to point and laugh. So it was up to me to get off my ass and do something. So I went back in. I asked for the job. I said, this time, let me sell all our services to all the Chinese people. And here's my proposition. You give me 60% pay cut. I'll make $2,000 a month. That's $24,000 a year. And if I can hit 15,000 the first 3 months, you keep me for the rest of the year. And if I can't, you only lost $6,000 to write off. So, Antonio Aguirre, who was from El Paso, as managing partner at the time, gave me the shot. And the first thing I did is I Googled what the hell we did eight
Good.
months into the job.
Barely.
And I learned what taxes were and what audit was. And remember, this is all financial things. And this is a guy who dropped out of college, who couldn't even barely pass accounting 200, and is now running working an accounting firm, but I was doing sales. And I really learned everything that I had. And the most important lesson was that you can self-educate yourself even at a level of that. And more importantly, if you stick out with relationships with people, eventually they'll do business with you.
Explain
Right?
a little bit more about that.
So what I mean by that is one of my largest clients was Foxconn. It took me 3 years to get them, and we did the audit for the whole country of Mexico, which has never been done in the history of Deloitte in any of the other countries. And we got the audit, and when they asked why, because for 3 years I was developing a friendship, and a real friendship. And because of my character, then they gave me a chance to do business. And as I performed, I went from there. And I think many times people are so rushed to get the sell. It's all about the sell. It's about making money right now and getting going. That there is no love. There's no, there's nothing that's genuine. So one salesperson is no different from another salesperson. Who cares, right? Now it just comes down to who's gonna give me the better fee. Or if you're lucky and you pass that thing, then it's who's gonna give me the better service. But when you're actually emotionally attached to someone, it makes it a little bit more harder. And that's what I did. I spent 3 years developing friendships and people, and that's how I started landing my biggest accounts. But I actually care. Like, I actually want to know these people. Where typical sales guys are just in and out, and I haven't heard from you in a year, and it's coming back and trying to do sales. That to me is just bad business.
Yeah.
So that's what I did, and that's what made it a little bit more different.
That's amazing. So then you went from manager to director, then director to partner in
Right.
8 years. And
Right.
you were, I mean, that's unheard of. It usually takes people about 25 years to become partners?
It takes people 25 years and at least a CPA or a PhD. And that's why I talk about niches and understanding what you're good at. Because we're so, the world has taught us, or people around us have taught us what we're so bad at. And that's why we have such self-esteem issues. But if you focus on what you're good at and accept through your ego that what you're bad at, and try to improve what you're bad at, then nobody can say shit to you, because you're focusing on your good. You're not ignoring that you're bad at things. You're not saying you're not bad at things. You're growing, developing. So people see the change, start respecting you, and you focus in on what you're good at. And that's kind of what led to me making partner, was because I was good at, talking to clients, being partners with them, going the extra mile. Like, I talk about how my IQ is okay, and I always say I have probably one of the highest EQs in the world. And I say that because if you are a person who came from Taiwan, you're living in Mexico, and nobody here, and you're working, you want to know what the damn grocery store is to buy Chinese food. You want to know where to go buy a car. You want to know where to put your kids in school. And I did what I said a true friend would do, is I would tell you which school to go to, and where the grocery store was, and where the places were that you can hang out. And I would hang out with them with zero expectation at that point. Hopefully they'll become a client, but zero expectation. And they all became clients. And that's what I mean by doing that. Like, do you understand your client base and the person you're talking to, and what is their purpose here? And if you can identify their struggles and actually give two shits about actually making it work, people become a lot more genuine and appreciative of it. And it leads to these magnificent moments of success. And the worst case scenario is you get a new friend.
See, I love that, because I feel, I'm not going to say that it's just in this time of day. I think just in general, there's a lot of people out there that only do things for other people because they think they're going to get something in return. And I am so anti that whatsoever. When I do things for people, I do them because I'm kind. Like, I just do them to do them. I like to see people, happy and smile. But there's just so many people that really take it the other way. They're like, well, I'm not going to do that for that person because what are they going to do for me in return? And that's not the way you should live life. I mean, that's not how opportunities are going to start coming to you. If anything, it's going to be kind of like a karmic thing where things are going to kind of shut down on you, and you're not going to get ahead in a lot of aspects.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, we live in a society now where everything has to be instantaneous. If you don't get the likes that you want, the comments you want, you start wondering why the post is bad, or what you did, or you start questioning timing. Because what it does is it does really mess with our fragile egos of what we have. And that's because we lack substance and being truly happy. And so what is happening is, let me do this for you so we can hang out and go from there. And one time, like a lot of people ask me to mentor them. The one thing I always tell people is, you've never asked what you could do for me. And that's
Exactly.
okay. You don't have to, but at the same time, we're all human beings. Everything's a give and take. And the basic thing should be is, I at least care about you, right? I at least can help share your thing. I never understood why, if your friend is an insurance agent, you wouldn't go to your friend to do your insurance if the prices are similar. I never understood why, if you were a friend and your friend, sold cars, why didn't you go to them first to see if they can get you a good deal? Because you should be taking care of your own. And when you start realizing that certain friends aren't like that, then you have to find new friends, because they're not about the crew eating. They're about themselves eating. And that's no bueno, right? That's no good. And so for me, that is something I hold near and dear to myself, and helping people. And the reality is, like, you have to know your limitations in anything, even when you're helping people. That's the reality of it. And there are these amazing selfless acts that the world is. But I always tell people this, and I say, look, money can't buy happiness, but being broke can't buy anything.
Yeah,
And that's
definitely.
true. And so you have to achieve those goals if you really want to do what you need to do and really make an impact. And that's not discouraging that you can't make an impact if you're not financially successful. That's not true at all. But it definitely helps, when you have a voice like a Bill Gates, right? Who is now, he's on the red thing where they're giving up 99% of what they own, or Richard Branson. That helps. Or, you might just be some guy who has $1 million and you have 99%. That's okay too. But to give without expectation is truly giving. And if you believe in any religion or any higher power, the higher power knows what your intentions were. And so you might sit there and say, well, my intentions were to give and help out, after taking your photo on Instagram.
Yeah.
But the higher power knows that that's for clout. And that's why I believe, like, when you talk about karma and giving, unless it's truly something that you do and really want, you can't even fool yourself. Right. And that's why I think
Yeah.
people fall flat.
I love that that you believe in that as well. That's something, all of these lessons that I preach now, they're things that I didn't learn until basically when I met Luke. So he's basically taught me everything that I know. And you speak almost exactly like him. It is very true. He always tells me too, he's like, you can't just go around asking people, for things. You have to, offer them something first. You have to ask them like, hey, what can I do for you?
Right.
That way we can grow this relationship, this friendship. Like, what can I do for you? And that really was, it was just something I never learned. My parents never taught me that. They don't teach you that in school.
Right.
It should be common sense, but it's not.
Right.
So it makes me really happy that that's something that you also believe in.
Absolutely. I
That's really
absolutely.
great. Okay, so then what happened that you ended up leaving Deloitte? You're now an entrepreneur, obviously. How did you take the shift from being in corporate America and deciding that you wanted to do things on your own?
Well, the funny thing was, I was always both. So
Okay.
even at Deloitte, that's when I started having the bars and the restaurants. I did both. What had hit me was, there was a part of that time that was there for 11 years at Deloitte, and his numbers weren't good. And so the next year that his numbers weren't good, they cut him. Right, the guy had been there 11 years as a partner, 20, how many more years before that. And at that time, I realized, let's do both. And I like to coin the term corporatepreneur, because I did both. I was a corporate guy, an entrepreneur. As a corporate guy, I got, the background, the press, the money, the structure and education. And as an entrepreneur, I had the creativity, the ability, the extra money I had here could go here, and that could make it work. And so I always did both. Basically my whole entire career and my whole entire life, to kind of get to where I was. And it was always scary to do both. But it was also, did it matter to you? Right. So to me, it was getting off of work, during my lunch times from 1 to 3, I'd go back to the restaurant, and I'm cooking at the restaurant, with a jacket, and then jumping in my suit and going back to work. Or when I got off of work, I'd go straight to the restaurant and run the night shifts. And then I'd get home at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock and start all over again. And I remember grinding almost 100 to 120 hours a week, 3 to 4 hours a day, doing this for many, 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 many years to try to achieve the goals I wanted to achieve. It taught me both. So right now it's so cool to be an entrepreneur, but not everyone's built to be an entrepreneur.
Mm-mm.
right? And not everyone's built to be a corporate guy, and not everyone's built to go to college, but not everyone's built not to go to college. And it's really what's best for you and being honest with yourself. And I think that was kind of the big thing was, can you be honest with yourself? Do you have the ability to be honest with yourself and to recognize your issues and your faults that you're going to have and what you can and you can't do? And that's what I did. I mean, it was never perfect, many ups and downs, many good days and many bad days. But the end result was something that I would have never changed, which was I got to do things I wanted to do and achieve my goals and go from there.
When you were, excuse my ignorance, when you were working at Deloitte, I mean, you were obviously working at Deloitte here in Mexico City, correct? So then you had a restaurant here in Mexico City as well? Is that how you would go back and forth, or how did that work?
I was back and forth between DF, Ciudad Juarez, and Tijuana, and then any of the small places. But those were my three primary cities because it was a national project. But when I'd come home across the border, I'd run my businesses, right? On the nights, on the weekends, the great thing about the clubs was it was the nights. I could do that. And so it really helped me develop it. And the other benefit was if I had clients that were in Deloitte or if I had people that wanted to go out, I'd stick to my bars, and it worked out. So it was definitely the opportunity to do both. And that's kind of how I did it.
That's awesome. So it was a great way to host people at the same time, but at your own place.
Exactly. So it was a VIP experience for all.
You know what's funny? I was just telling Luke about this, that the reason that I even found out who you were was because I used to work at Wells Fargo, I think back in like 2000, I'm going to say like 2013, somewhere around that time. And I remember you would walk into you walked in one time and then everybody was like, oh my God, it's David Chen. And I'm like, who's David Chen? I had just like started working there and then we're telling me, oh, he owns like this club and that club and he owns this and that. And I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And I mean, it had taken a while. I had just like, I guess been friends on you like through social media, and then we had mutual friends as well. So I met you a few times later on, and then it's nice to be on the conversation with you now. But I forgot to tell you that's actually initially how I had heard about you.
Thank you. You make me feel super cool. I appreciate
So that's cool, right?
Yeah.
Everybody freaking out at the bank when you were walking in. It was. I think it's pretty cool.
That means a lot to me. Thank you. That's really cool to hear.
Okay, so you were working your butt off, and it's one of those things that people just at that point are kind of like thinking, oh, he got lucky, he just got lucky, and you're over here like blood, sweat, and tears throughout the whole thing. And I know the story from being around Luke as well and talking to other entrepreneurs. Like, you guys really just give up your life in order to be able to succeed in the name of success in so many aspects. What would you say is your primary, what is the main thing that attracts you into a certain type of business? Is it strictly monetary, or is it because it's something you believe in? How is it that you're able to, deep in your core, put in so much work and so much of yourself to make something succeed?
Well, I kind of want to go back and I would say this. I think it depends on what stage of life you're in. And again, I talk about checking your ego and being very honest about yourself. So when I was doing Deloitte and I was doing all the clubs and bars, it was my own ego. I was feeding the beast. I was feeding my ego. I wasn't, as I was telling you earlier about giving and not doing it for the wrong reasons. That was the difference between the man I was and the man I am, right? When you do a business like that, it's for clout. It's for probably not all the right reasons. It is a great PR incentive because you do get to meet a lot of people, but you don't get to meet them in a real circumstance that exists. And it becomes very superficial because you are giving out drinks or you're buying drinks and things like that. And when the lights close, so do the people. Yeah. And that's one thing I think a lot of people have a hard time understanding, because you can correlate that to being a music artist or a movie artist or a sports athlete or anyone that is someone in the public eye, as at the moment the lights are gone, you lose a little bit of your identity. And so when I was doing that, it was clout chasing as opposed to really trying to make some real money and do it the right way. Because we were taught that a nice car and this and this and this and this was going to be the key to many, many successes and vices that just weren't real. And as I become a little bit older and a little bit more, hopefully I like to say mature and ingrained in my thoughts, it's now become what is the best opportunity? Is the opportunity something that I can leverage, later on? Is it a long-term investment? What am I going to do on a short-term investment? How can I make immediate money because I still have to pay the bills every month? On my midterm, what do I think is going to pay off in 3 years? Can I afford it? Where are we at with that? There's so many different factors, and I really think it's the phases of your life that really make the difference. Obviously, you want to get a return, you want to do things, but the number one thing that everyone has to understand is there is 100% chance you're going to lose your money. There's 100% chance you're going to fail. Well, if you go on that mindset of those two things, you'll be okay because you didn't have the expectations of it winning, right? Now you have nothing to lose. Now you're hungry and now you're attacking. Whereas the false sense of reality is, or the way that even if you're pitched it, and you're not even, if you're pitched something and you're not educating yourself enough to really learn what it is, you have no one to blame but yourself, right? I don't blame anyone if a deal doesn't go through or I've lost money. I blame myself because I could have worked harder. I could have, the cards could have been different. I could have educated myself more. And we're so easy to blame everybody and it's everyone's fault. That's someone who's not self-aware, who hasn't checked their ego. Because if you're really aware of the things that you've done, you're like, well, it is what it is. We got to move on and go from there. And I think that's a big thing. And the other thing I always tell people is like, we don't give ourselves enough credit. We've survived 100% of our worst days. Think about that. Every breakup, every time someone disappointed us, every time we lost a job, every time we failed. We're still here. The world was going to end. The world has ended 100,000 times for us. We're still trucking, right? And people tend to forget that because they don't tend to look at the positive. They tend to look at the negative. And damn, like we're just lucky to even be talking to each other in our places next to people that we love, that love us. Like that in itself is a blessing that most people would beg to have. So when you start looking at those perspectives, it's different. So when it comes to start, investing and doing businesses, I have found myself invested passively in certain things. I have found myself, depending on how the partnerships work, where they are, I have found myself in deep holes where I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to fix this. And I found myself sitting there riding high. And what I'm trying to tell everyone here is there's so many phases of it, and it's not perfect, and it's not what Instagram says it is, and it's never like that. It really is a reality where you're going to have so many ups and downs, and you have to really believe that you can do it, and you just can't quit. And I tell people this all the time. There's two things I tell people. I said, if you had a kid, your niece, your nephew, your godchild, someone to take care of, and they were starving, what would you do to make sure they were fed? Would you give up your excuses? Would you give up your pride to take a lesser job? Would you give up your attitudes? Would you say, most people say, I don't need this shit. Would you need this shit because you have to feed them? And the answer is yes. Because the basic fundamental thing about human beings is we want to take care, we want to give the next generation the best. So why not? So if you can apply, and you're picking and choosing to apply that to that, why don't you do that in every single day life, whether it's business or your relationship or your work? That's a big thing. So, when it comes to that fundamental issue, I think that's really, really core, because you have to absolutely, genuinely want to do it. And the same thing with investing in anything. Again, you can lose, but you're definitely going to lose if you don't start. And it's definitely trials and tribulations, and you're not alone, and everybody has bad days, and everybody has cash flow problems, and everybody, will have a promise that didn't work out, or you're all the way to the top and the bridge collapsed and you have to figure out how to rebuild it again. But not everybody tries to rebuild it again, or can forgive themselves, right? Or ask for forgiveness from others to continue to work. And I think that's where the self-realization comes in. So when you talk about investments for me now, it really just comes down to, where my portfolio is, where I'm at, and how comfortable I feel about it, and then that's the difference between that and everything else.
You're pretty comfortable with failure now, right? I think.